Welcome back to part 2 of How to Immigrate. If you missed part 1, go check it out now. Season 2, vlog 40. If you've already checked out part 1, let's go back to Paris and continue our conversation with Prae. When did you make the jump to PwC?
So at the end of my rotation to the, we'll call it San Jose office, I was offered the opportunity to stay on with that firm. And at that point, you kind of ask yourself, well, I'm already in the market. Let me figure out if there's any other opportunities out there. You're already going to make the jump. You're jumping across a continent. Why not? And so during the 4 months that I was there, I built up a little network of the friends and colleagues that I'd worked with. And it was a case of letting them know that I was interested in staying permanently. And they were more than happy to reach out to their networks. And by the end of the week, I was getting calls from different recruiters that I didn't have to do any of the work, really. I just made my intentions known, and it was a decision as to where is the best market for someone just starting their career. Go to where the work is, I suppose, and also where the cost of living is extraordinarily high.
And Houston was a good mix for both of those.
Absolutely, and I a lot of people were saying, you're moving from West Coast to Houston, what's wrong with you? And I do not regret that move. That was an absolutely, the market was amazing. I learned so much from that practice. And you got to do the work that you might not have otherwise done, and it was great. I could afford a house, within like the first year or so of moving there. That was not something you can definitely do in San Jose.
Right.
So I let the partners then know very early on that I'm very interested in doing a rotation. So by about the second or third year, I kept bringing it up. And it was a case of whether it was a rotation in London as a tax desk, essentially, or doing the DC rotation, and keeping true to sort of just developing my international tax skills.
All right, so I've probably been to Paris a dozen times. One thing that I still have on my bucket list for Paris were the catacombs. Apparently there are over 6 million people that were buried here in the catacombs. And I've got some lady who's really... Do you need to put that in there? Sorry.
Excuse me.
Oh, you're good. I'm using a mailbox as my tripod, and she needed to mail a letter. So, welcome to Paris. Apparently there are 6 million people that are buried in the catacombs. They collected the remains of people from, I believe, almost 1,500 years in the early part of the 18th century and started these catacombs. Let me ask you, visa, like how does this work now for those that, I'm not really sure how this process works, but you had those, you mentioned those visa issues earlier in your career and going back to Thailand, but how has that process worked for you now that you've been in the US?
So there's a surprising amount of people who are on a visa. So you might not realize it, and I think a lot of folks just assume I'm American. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of us, and every experience is different. It depends on which visa you start with. Mm-hmm. For example, if you started out with PwC, say Tokyo, and you were just going to do a rotation to the U.S., you start on a different visa, and it's much easier to get the L1 or the L visas. They're much easier to get, and because it's viewed as an inter-firm rotation. If you start out fresh with, which I think the majority of us, we're on the H-1B, that is a very strenuous visa to go through, and it has a shelf life of essentially 7 years. There is an exception where you can keep extending year by year if you're sort of in between status. But you towards you're on your 5th year or so, probably maybe even earlier, you want to start considering, well, if I want to continue to stay in the U.S., you have to go down the green card route. Okay. And that's a different story altogether. And it's hard to say what the process is like right now because it's changing. Sure. This administration, they've during my little time alone, they've changed the system so that before there was no real interview requirement, in-person interview with the immigration authorities. Now there is. So I think this wave is the first wave where we have to actually go interview in person. And I mean, it went, for me, it went quite well, smoothly. The green card was issued within 2 weeks after that. But I understand it's not the case for everyone. There's a lot of delays in the system right now. So,
what advice would you give to your younger self?
Just be open-minded about location. Be okay with taking a few, maybe detours to get here. It's usually worth it in the end. There's no real wrong turn. I think we hesitate a lot to say, well, do I make this jump? Is this the right decision? And I don't think there's a wrong answer. And so if we just factor out the indecisions out of our, just if you think, make a judgment call if it's good and put your energy into that, then that's taking out some of the wasted energy that you could otherwise focus on what you want to do.
Yeah, a career is such a long journey. We sometimes stress over these little decisions, and I know I've certainly do it. And I can still have the tendency to do it of, small career decisions seem so big at the time, and then when you look back in hindsight, it's really all just part of the journey. And sometimes it's linear and sometimes it's winding, but you learn from every experience.
Right.
So Prae Kriengwatana, Director in our Washington National Tax Services practice. Thank you very much for sharing your story, and congratulations. Do I congratulate you on the green card? Is that a?
Yeah, sure. We'll take it. Okay.
So fantastic 3 days here in Paris. Special thanks to Prae Kriengwatana for agreeing to come on the Doug McConey vlog and share her story about emigrating to the U.S. and getting a job with PwC. And so long from Paris, and stay tuned next week for another exciting edition of the Doug McConey vlog.